I discovered my wife has been sending nude photos to her ex for months, and now she's demanding I join their open relationship or she's leaving with half of everything. The shock hit me like a train. I stood there, staring at my wife, Ava, 35F, the woman I'd shared over a decade of my life with. She looked back at me with a defiance I couldn't quite believe. She'd admitted it so casually, like it was just some minor misunderstanding we could talk through over dinner. But there it was. Ava had been sending nude photos to her ex, Nate, 36M, for months. And now, as if the betrayal wasn't enough, she was demanding that I either agree to join in some open arrangement or risk losing half of everything we built together. I ran a hand over my face, my mind racing. Alva, what the hell were you thinking? She folded her arms, sighing as if I were the one overreacting. It's not like I actually cheated, Matt, 37M. It's just photos. It's a way of keeping things exciting. You know I never leave you. Not cheating. I could barely get the words out, my chest tight with disbelief. Sending photos to your ex, who's clearly still interested in you, isn't cheating. How long have you been doing this, Ava? She had the decency to look away, her arms crossed defensively. It's been a few months, okay? And like I said, it was harmless. Nate and I have history, and we're close. I thought you'd understand. Understand? I echoed, my voice rising. You've been going behind my back, sending intimate photos to another man, your ex of all people. And you expect me to be okay with it? She shrugged, looking almost bored. That's the thing, Matt. I need more. I need excitement, variety. You've been so focused on work and your own routines that I feel like I'm just part of the background in your life. My blood was boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm. So your solution is to send nudes to your ex. That's how you decide to handle feeling neglected. She rolled her eyes. Look, I didn't bring this up to argue. I'm trying to give us both options here. We open things up, let each other have some freedom, or we can split. And we both know what that means. There it was, the threat. She knew what a divorce would mean for me. She'd made it clear more than once that if we ever separated, she'd fight for every penny, every asset. We built a life together, from our home to the savings we'd worked so hard to build. And now she was leveraging it against me, trying to manipulate me into agreeing to something I couldn't even wrap my head around. I leaned against the counter, trying to collect my thoughts. So that's what this is about. Giving yourself permission to cheat whenever you want, and threatening me if I don't go along with it. She rolled her eyes. It's not cheating if we both agree to it, Matt. I just want to be honest with you. Nate's a part of my life, and I don't see why that has to be a problem. We can both explore things outside of our marriage and be better for it. Explore. I was struggling to keep my voice steady, anger and hurt twisting inside me. And what exactly would this exploration look like, Ava? You and Nate carrying on however you want, while I sit back and pretend everything's fine. She sighed, as if I was making this all unnecessarily difficult. It doesn't have to be like that. You could explore too, meet other people, or... I don't want anyone else, Ava. I want my wife, the woman I thought I knew. The bitterness in my own voice surprised me, a wave of hurt crashing over me as I finally said the words out loud. She shook her head, looking at me like I was some old-fashioned fool. And what about me, Matt? What about what I want? We're both adults here, and it's time we started acting like it. I need more out of life, more out of us. I took a steadying breath, feeling the shock slowly settle into cold anger. You should have told me that a long time ago, Ava. Not after sneaking around with your ex, lying to my face, and now pretending like this was all some enlightened choice. She crossed her arms, an indignant look flashing across her face. Fine. You want to be stuck in your narrow idea of marriage. Go ahead, but if you're not willing to try this, to make things work on my terms, then maybe I was right to go to Nate. At least he respects my needs. The words cut deep, sharper than I thought possible. It was like a final punch to the gut, her making me out to be the unreasonable one in all of this. And what if I don't agree, Ava? I asked, my voice low but steady. What if I refuse to go along with this? Are you really ready to end everything over this? She shrugged, looking away. Then I will have to talk about what that looks like. We split everything, go our own ways. I'm not saying that's what I want, But if you're unwilling to compromise, then what choice do I have? My anger bubbled over. Ava, you've already made the choice. You made it the second you sent that first picture. You made it every time you lied to me, every time you pretended like you were committed to us while living this double life. She sighed, exasperated. Matt, stop being so dramatic. You're acting like I betrayed you in the worst way possible. Maybe because you have, I replied, my voice quiet but firm. And I can't unsee this side of you, Ava. I can't just pretend like this never happened. You've broken something in us that I don't think can be fixed. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, but I could see a flicker of doubt cross her face. So, what? Are you saying you'd rather throw this all away than at least try something different? I'm saying, I replied, taking a deep breath, that I'm not going to live in a marriage where I have to compete with another man, especially not one you chose to keep around behind my back. Ava sighed, frustration seeping through her posture as she stood in the kitchen, glancing around as if searching for an answer hidden somewhere in the walls. But there was none to be found. The silence stretched between us, heavy and final, and for the first time, I realized just how little I truly knew her. Finally, she straightened, her voice cold and clipped. Fine, Matt. You want out? Then we'll see each other in court. But don't expect me to just walk away with nothing. I've put as much into this life as you have, and I'll make sure I get what I'm owed. With that, she grabbed her purse, her face set in a mask of resolve, and walked out, the front door slamming behind her. I stood there, the silence settling around me like dust, feeling the weight of her betrayal like an anchor pulling me down. The life I'd built, the future I'd imagined with her, had shattered in the span of a single conversation. And now, I was left standing in the wreckage, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly, so completely. The days that followed were a blur. Alma didn't come home that night or the next. When she finally texted, it was with a short message. I'll be by on Friday to pick up some things. Let's keep this civil. The words felt cold, transactional. There was no hint of regret, no apology, not even an attempt to explain herself further. She was already preparing for the split, planning her next move as if our life together had been some kind of temporary arrangement. I spent those days in a haze, alternating between anger and disbelief. My mind kept circling back to the little things. The late nights she'd claimed she was at a friend's house, the times she'd laughed off her phone lighting up with notifications. All those moments I'd brushed off with trust, with the certainty that my wife wouldn't betray me. By Friday, I was ready to face her. I'd spent hours thinking about what I'd say, how I'd confront her, if only to get some real answers. When she showed up, she looked every bit as composed as ever, her hair neatly pulled back, her expression calm as she stepped into our home. But her eyes were distant, as if she'd already moved on. She walked straight to the bedroom without a word, and I followed, watching as she opened her closet and started packing. The sight felt surreal, like I was watching a stranger, not the woman I'd spent years of my life with. So that's it? I asked, breaking the silence. You're really just leaving? She glanced at me, her face expressionless. I told you, Matt. I gave you an option, and you refused it. I'm not going to waste time on something that isn't working for either of us. Something that isn't working. I repeated, my voice rising. Ava, we were building a life together. You never said a word about being unhappy, never even hinted at wanting anything different. And now, all of a sudden, it's either this open relationship or nothing. She sighed, clearly frustrated. You keep making this about me, but you're missing the point. We've both changed. I can't keep pretending like this marriage is enough when it hasn't been for a long time. Then why didn't you just tell me? I asked, feeling the anger simmer beneath my words. Why sneak around with your ex, send him photos, and drag me through this mess? She paused, folding a shirt slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. Because I didn't want to hurt you, Matt. I thought I could handle it on my own, find a way to fill the gaps. But when I realized I couldn't, I tried to talk to you, and you just shut down. Don't act like you're some noble martyr. I shot back, the bitterness slipping through. This wasn't about filling gaps. It was about you doing what you wanted, and then trying to force me into accepting it afterward. Her face hardened, and she set down the shirt, looking directly at me. Fine. If that's how you see it, so be it. But I'm not going to apologize for wanting more out of my life. The words hung between us, final and unyielding. She went back to packing, ignoring me as if the conversation had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. I watched her in silence, the realization settling in that this wasn't a fight we could come back from. This was her way of saying goodbye, of washing her hands of the years we'd spent together. After a few minutes, she zipped up her suitcase and turned to me, her face impassive. "I'll have my lawyer reach out. We'll sort out the details. Let's make this as smooth as possible, for both our sakes." I shook my head, trying to process her cold detachment. "That's it? No explanation, no apology. Just goodbye." She shrugged, her voice flat. "We're both adults, Matt. This isn't a storybook ending. Sometimes things just end." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving me standing alone in the bedroom we'd once shared. The weight of her words pressed down on me, and for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about who she truly was. Ava had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who had no problem discarding the life we'd built together for her own fleeting desires. As the days passed, I started working through the practicalities of the separation. Lawyers, dividing assets, the endless paperwork. It felt like a dissection of the life I'd thought would last forever. Each meeting, each form, was a reminder of the betrayal and the resentment I'd built up over the years, too blind to see what had been right in front of me. I talked to friends, reaching out to people I hadn't connected with in a while. It was surprising how much support they offered, how many of them reached out and offered their help. I confided in Jake, 38M, an old college buddy who had gone through a rough divorce himself a few years back. When I told him the details, his reaction was a mix of sympathy and disbelief. "Man, that's brutal," he said, shaking his head. "But look at it this way. At least you found out now before you invested even more. She clearly wasn't who you thought she was." "Yeah, but it doesn't make it easier," I admitted, the bitterness still fresh. "I don't even know how to look back on our time together. It feels like I was married to a stranger." Jake nodded, his face somber. "I get that. It's like the rug's been pulled out from under you. But trust me, it'll get better. The anger will fade, and eventually, you'll be glad you're not stuck in a relationship where you're someone's second option." His words stuck with me. I spent the following weeks working through my emotions, feeling the anger and resentment lessen little by little. I poured myself into work, keeping busy, but every so often, the bitterness would creep back in, reminding me of the person Abba had turned out to be. I knew I'd never get the answers I wanted, the closure I thought I needed, but I also knew that the only way forward was to accept that some people would always choose themselves above everyone else. And then, about a month into the separation process, I got another message from Abba. "I think we should talk. There are a few things I'd like to clear up. Meet me for coffee." Part of me wanted to ignore it, to avoid the inevitable back and forth. But there was a small part of me that needed to hear what she had to say, if only for the sake of ending things once and for all. Reluctantly, I agreed, setting up a time and place. When we met at the cafe, Ava looked almost the same as she had the last time I'd seen her, but there was something different in her eyes, something colder, more calculating. She wasted no time with small talk, diving straight into what she'd come to say. "Matt," she began, her tone brisk, "I think we need to get on the same page about this divorce. I want to keep things civil, but I also expect my fair share of what we've built together." I nodded, feeling a wave of irritation rise. "You mean I built? While you were off with your ex, I was the one making sure we had everything we needed." She rolled her eyes. "That's not fair, Matt. We both contributed to this marriage. You think just because you didn't like my choices, that means I don't deserve anything. Your choices are exactly why we're here." I shot back, struggling to keep my voice low. "You put yourself and Nate above our marriage. I don't owe you anything for that." She leaned back, crossing her arms with a smug smile. "You better hope the court agrees with you, Matt, because I've spoken to my lawyer and he says I have every right to half of what we built, whether you like it or not." Her words were a slap in the face, but I held back, unwilling to let her bait me into another argument. "Fine, Ava. If you want half, take it. But remember, this isn't about the money. You've already shown me who you are. Whatever you get out of this won't change what you've done." She hesitated, her composure slipping for just a second before she forced a smile. "I guess we'll both find out, won't we?" As I watched her leave the cafe, I felt a strange sense of release. This was the real Ava, the woman who would walk away from everything we'd shared just to satisfy her own selfish needs. And as painful as it was, I realized that maybe I was lucky to see her true colors before investing even more years into a life that had been built on lies. This time, as I walked away, I felt something new, a flicker of hope. I'd lost something I'd once cherished, but in its place, I'd gained a clarity and a freedom I hadn't known I needed. Over the next several weeks, I focused on rebuilding what Ava had torn down. The divorce proceedings took on a life of their own, dragging me through endless paperwork, meetings with my lawyer, and what felt like daily negotiations over every asset we'd accumulated. Each time I faced another demand from her, it reminded me how much I'd lost, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally. The woman I'd once trusted implicitly was now treating our life together as nothing more than a transaction, something to be divided and split. But somehow, amid the chaos, I found myself becoming stronger, more resilient. I was learning to focus on the life I could rebuild rather than the one that had fallen apart. Old friends like Jake kept me grounded, and my coworkers noticed the shift too, offering quiet support and encouragement. Work became a lifeline, a way to remind myself of who I was outside of this failed marriage. One evening, Dick invited me to a small get-together at his place. He promised it would be low-key, just a few people, and assured me I'd get a break from the stresses of the divorce. I hesitated, but ultimately the thought of being around friends won me over. By the time I arrived, I found that he pulled together an unexpected crowd, including some of our old college friends and a few new faces. One of them was Sophie, 34F, a friend of Jake's from work. She had a warm smile, an easy laugh, and this energy that made it hard not to feel at ease around her. Over the course of the evening, we found ourselves talking, first about the city and eventually about life's twists and turns. She listened with a sincerity that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. "So, you're fresh out of a messy divorce," she said, half joking, but with an understanding that was rare. "Welcome to the club. I went through mine last year, and honestly, it felt like a fog I couldn't escape." Her words resonated with me in a way I hadn't expected. It's exactly like that. Every time I think I'm done dealing with it, something else comes up, and it's like I'm dragged right back in. She nodded, giving a sympathetic smile. "Yeah, but it gets easier. Eventually, you'll get to a place where you can see it for what it is. A part of your story, but not the whole story." As the evening wore on, I found myself relaxing, talking to Sophie about the things I'd never admitted to anyone, not just the details of my broken marriage, but the loss of self I'd experienced along the way. It felt good to open up without any expectations, to talk freely without worrying about judgments. When I left that night, I felt a strange sense of lightness, a glimpse of the man I'd been before Abba's betrayal. I hadn't felt like myself in so long that I'd almost forgotten what it was like to connect with someone without the weight of distrust lingering in the background. Over the next few weeks, Sophie and I kept in touch. We'd meet for coffee, sometimes grab dinner, and soon enough, I found myself looking forward to our conversations. She had her own stories of loss and resilience, her own scars from a marriage that hadn't worked out, and together we joked that we were forming a survivors club. Her openness made it easy to let my guard down, to talk freely about the things I tried to keep buried. One evening, we were sitting at a small cafe, sharing stories over coffee, when Sophie asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you could ever trust someone again?" she asked, her gaze steady. "After everything?" I hesitated, the question hanging heavily between us. "I don't know," I admitted, the words coming out softer than I'd intended. "There's still this part of me that feels like if I let someone in again, they'll just find a way to break what's left." She nodded, her expression understanding. "I get that. Trust is something you build over time, and losing it can feel like losing a part of yourself. But you're also building something new, something that wasn't there before. That's worth taking a risk for." Her words stayed with me that night as I walked back to my apartment. I'd been so focused on protecting myself, on keeping everything locked up tight, that I hadn't considered the possibility of moving forward in a real way. Maybe Sophie was right. Maybe the only way to truly rebuild was to take the risk, to let someone see the parts of me that had been broken and still believe that I could be whole again. As I settled into this new perspective, the divorce proceedings finally neared an end. Abba's demands had been relentless, but my lawyer and I had fought back, securing a fair split that left me with a portion of what I'd worked so hard for. It wasn't everything I'd hoped to keep, but it was enough to start fresh, enough to close this chapter on my terms. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. There had been a time when I thought Ava and I would grow old together, that we'd build a future side by side. But that version of our life was gone, replaced by a new reality that I was still learning to navigate. That evening, I met Sophie at a nearby park, a quiet spot we discovered on one of our walks. She brought a bottle of wine, and we sat on a bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon as we talked. "So, it's official?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Yeah," I said, nodding slowly. "It's over. It's really over." She looked at me with a warm smile, holding up her glass. "To new beginnings, then, and to finding yourself again." I raised my glass, clinking it against hers, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life I was ready to embrace. I'd been through the worst, and somehow I'd come out on the other side. As the stars started to appear overhead, Sophie turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Matt, you're one of the strongest people I've met. I don't think you give yourself enough credit." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I've had a lot of help," I replied, meeting her gaze, "and I'm grateful for it." For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. There was a new path in front of me, one that I was carving out on my own terms. I wasn't defined by Abba's betrayal or by the hurt I'd carried with me. I was free to rebuild, to choose my own happiness, and to live the life I wanted. As Sophie and I sat together in the quiet of the night, I knew that I was finally ready to leave the past behind. This was my fresh start, a chance to rediscover who I was and who I wanted to become. And with each passing day, I felt more certain that I was on the right path. As the weeks rolled by, life slowly began to feel like it was mine again. The relief of finally having the divorce behind me felt like a weight had been lifted, even if there were moments when the pain would resurface. But I was building something new, and that feeling, of finally moving forward on my terms, was irreplaceable. I kept busy with work, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages, and continued meeting up with Sophie for our Survivors Club conversations, which had become one of the highlights of my week. Through these times together, Sophie and I found that our connection went beyond shared experiences of divorce. We talked about everything, dreams we'd left on hold, things we still wanted to accomplish, even funny stories about old friendships and family quirks. There was a lightness to it, a freedom in sharing with someone who didn't see me through the lens of Abba's betrayal, but just as me. Sophie had become my close friend, someone who understood the journey I was on because she'd been there herself. And yet, the more time we spent together, the more I felt something between us shifting. One evening, after a long day, Sophie invited me to her place for dinner. She insisted it was nothing fancy, just pasta and wine, but by the time I arrived, the aroma of her cooking filled the air, and she'd even lit candles around her apartment. We sat at her small table, laughing and sharing stories as we ate, and I realized that for the first time since my marriage, I felt completely at ease. There were no expectations, no hidden agendas, just two people who enjoyed each other's company. After dinner, we moved to her living room, sitting close on the couch, the warmth of the wine and the glow of the candlelight creating an atmosphere that was both comforting and charged with something unspoken. At one point, our laughter died down, and we found ourselves just looking at each other, a quiet understanding passing between us. "Sophie," I began, my voice soft, "I know we've both been through a lot, but I feel something here, and I don't want to ruin what we have, but I can't ignore it either." She smiled, reaching out to place her hand on mine. "Matt, I felt it too. I didn't expect this, and I didn't want to rush anything, but I think sometimes the best things happen when we aren't looking for them." Her words settled over me like a balm, and I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to take a chance, to open myself up again. I leaned forward, and she met me halfway, our kiss a gentle promise of something new, something untouched by the hurt we'd both endured. From that moment, everything changed. We took things slowly, careful not to let our pasts define what was blossoming between us. We both knew the scars we carried, but instead of letting them hold us back, we shared them openly, giving each other the space to heal in our own time. Being with Sophie felt like a second chance, a chance to build something based on understanding, respect, and genuine connection. As we spent more time together, she became an anchor for me, reminding me of who I was outside of my failed marriage. We would spend weekends hiking, cooking together, or just exploring the city, discovering new places and making new memories. It was a gradual rebuilding, a steady process of learning to trust again, both her and myself. One weekend, Sophie suggested we take a small road trip out to the coast, just the two of us. The idea thrilled me. It was something Abba and I had always talked about, but never seemed to make time for. So I said yes, and soon we were on the road, the open highway stretching before us, laughter and music filling the car. It was freeing, exhilarating even to just let go and enjoy the moment without any lingering fears or doubts. When we reached the coast, we spent the day exploring, walking along the beach, and talking about everything and nothing. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the water, we sat down in the sand, watching the waves crash against the shore. Sophie looked over at me, a soft smile on her face. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Being here. It feels like we're both exactly where we're supposed to be." I nodded, taking her hand in mine. "Yeah, it does. I never thought I'd get here, to a place where I could be happy again, where I could look at the future without feeling weighed down by the past." She squeezed my hand, her gaze steady. "We both deserve to be happy, Matt. And I think we're finally allowing ourselves that." Sitting there with her, watching the sun sink below the horizon, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was what life was meant to feel like, not perfect, not without challenges, but filled with moments of genuine connection, laughter, and the quiet peace of being with someone who truly understood me. As the weeks turned into months, Sophie and I continued to grow together. She supported my passions, encouraged me to reconnect with old hobbies, and even helped me redecorate my apartment, turning it into a space that felt completely my own. My life, once full of anger and bitterness, had transformed into something I could truly look forward to each day. One evening, as we were making dinner at my place, Sophie turned to me, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Okay, don't laugh," she said, biting her lip. "But I got us something." Curious, I looked over as she reached into her bag and pulled out 2 small notebooks. She handed one to me, her cheeks flushing slightly. "It's a sort of gratitude journal," she explained, laughing at herself. "I thought it might be fun if we both started writing down the things we're grateful for, the little moments that make us happy. Just something to remind us of how far we've come." Touched, I opened the notebook, running my fingers over the blank pages. "I think that's a perfect idea, Sophie. Thank you." We both laughed, a little self-conscious, but as I opened the journal and wrote down the first entry, I realized that this was exactly what I needed. It was a way to stay grounded, to remember that life was no longer about holding on to past hurts but embracing each new moment with gratitude. And so, every day, I wrote in that notebook, capturing memories, thoughts, and small moments of joy. It was a constant reminder of the life I was creating, one that I chose, free of the shadows of betrayal. Sophie was part of it, yes, but she wasn't the whole of it. This new life was mine, shaped by my choices, my growth, and my resilience. As I looked back on everything I've been through, the heartbreak, the loss, the rebuilding, I realized that I was grateful for every moment, even the painful ones. They brought me here to a life that was authentically mine, one I was ready to fully embrace. And as Sophie and I moved forward together, I knew that whatever the future held, I was finally where I was meant to be. The next few months felt like a dream. With each day, I felt myself settling more comfortably into the life I'd rebuilt, one that was honest and fulfilling in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sophie and I continued to grow closer, our relationship a steady, calming presence in my life. With her, there were no unspoken expectations, no need to prove myself or bend into someone else's version of who I should be. I could just be me, and that was enough. Together, Sophie and I kept up our gratitude journaling, a small ritual that helped ground us in the present and reminded us of the life we were creating. Each entry reflected not just the highs but also the smaller, quieter moments that held meaning. A morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, a sunset we watched from a hilltop, a new recipe we managed to cook without setting off the smoke alarm. One evening, as we were looking back through our journals, Sophie laughed, pointing at a page where she jotted down, "Accidentally made the worst pasta ever, but Matt ate it anyway." I grinned, remembering the disaster that meal had been and how we'd laughed until our stomachs hurt. "Hey, I wasn't about to let good pasta go to waste," I teased, nudging her. "It's the thought that counts, right?" She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "It's more than that. It's knowing I can be myself with you, even if that means terrible cooking, and that you'll still be there." As I looked down at her, warmth flooded through me. Here, in the simple routines we created, in the life we shared without forcing it, I found something I hadn't even known I was searching for: a sense of true partnership. This relationship wasn't about filling voids or mending past wounds. It was about building something real, something honest. One weekend, Sophie suggested we try something new, visiting a local nonprofit organization that was looking for volunteers to help clean up a nearby trail. Hiking had always been a passion of ours, and the idea of giving back to the trails we loved felt like the perfect way to spend a day. When we arrived at the trailhead, surrounded by volunteers of all ages, I felt a surge of energy. Together, we spent hours clearing paths, picking up litter, and trimming overgrown foliage. Sophie was right there beside me, her cheeks flushed from the sun, her laughter echoing as we worked. By the end of the day, we were exhausted but filled with the quiet sense of accomplishment. As we walked back to the car, she slipped her hand into mine, looking up at me with a contented smile. "This feels right, doesn't it? Being out here, doing something that matters." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "Yeah, it does, and it feels even better doing it with you." That day was a turning point. I realized that with Sophie, I wasn't just rebuilding a life. I was creating a future, one filled with purpose and meaning, shared with someone who truly understood me. I could see a path forward, one that wasn't defined by the hurt of my past but by the joy of what lay ahead. As the months passed, Sophie and I continued finding ways to deepen our connection. She encouraged me to take up photography again, something I'd loved in my younger years but had let fall away. With her support, I started going on solo photography trips, capturing the landscapes around us, finding beauty in the everyday moments. One evening, after I'd shared some of my recent photos with her, she looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Matt, these are incredible. You have a real talent. Maybe it's time you show them to more than just me." The idea of sharing my work publicly was daunting, but Sophie's encouragement made me consider it. Eventually, I found a local art fair and signed up for a small booth. On the day of the fair, I set up my photos, nervous but excited, and was overwhelmed by the positive reactions. People stopped to admire my work, some even buying a few prints. For the first time, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was mine alone, separate from any relationship or past hardship. At the end of the day, Sophie found me at my booth, a proud smile lighting up her face. "See, I told you people would love it." I grinned, pulling her into a hug. "Thank you, Sophie, for everything. I don't think I'd be here without you." She leaned back, looking into my eyes. "You would have found your way, Matt. Maybe not exactly like this, but you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Her words stayed with me as we drove home, and I realized that, for the first time, I genuinely believed them. I was no longer haunted by the person I'd been with Abba or defined by the wounds of that betrayal. I found my strength, my purpose, and a love that was built on trust and shared dreams. A few weeks later, as we sat on the porch of the cabin we'd rented for a weekend getaway, Sophie turned to me, her expression serious yet hopeful. "Matt, have you ever thought about the future? About us?" I looked at her, my heart pounding as I took in her question. "I think about it all the time, Sophie, and I know it's still early, but I can see a future with you. One that's honest, real, and built on everything we created together." She smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "I feel the same way. I've never felt this at peace with someone before. I want to build a life with you, Matt, one that we both choose, every day." In that moment, I knew we were both ready to take the next step. It wasn't about filling voids or fixing broken pieces. It was about creating a new story, one that honored who we were and what we'd been through. As we watched the sunset together, her hand in mine, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't thought possible. This wasn't the life I'd once imagined, but it was so much more. I'd found a love that wasn't defined by the past but was rooted in the present, in the everyday moments that made life beautiful. And as we sat there, Watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold, I knew that I'd finally found my true beginning, one filled with love, resilience, and the quiet promise of a life shared with someone who valued every part of me. This was my new chapter, one I would embrace with open arms, knowing that the best was still to come.